Hey guys. Most people live their entire human existence locked inside an invisible prison that they built with their very own hands, constantly behaving as if every single thing in the outside world has absolute power over them. Your mood completely changes with a single text message. Your confidence completely changes based on the feedback of a coworker. Your peace of mind completely changes based on the unpredictable outcomes of your daily social interactions. But the ancient Stoics saw this exact psychological dynamic from a profoundly different perspective, understanding that control is rarely taken from you by force, but rather it is willingly given away. If you have ever felt completely exhausted from trying to fit in, or if you have ever compromised your true character just to avoid the judgment of the crowd, this message is exactly for you. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, a man who survived the brutal and unforgiving reality of being a Roman slave, observed that while a few men are held fast by physical slavery, there are many more who hold fast to psychological slavery. He spent his early years observing the most powerful and wealthy elite of the Roman Empire, including his own master, Epictetus, who was a high-ranking secretary to the Emperor Nero. Epictetus noticed a highly tragic irony. These wealthy men had absolute political power, massive estates, and millions of dollars in wealth. Yet they lived in constant, agonizing terror of public opinion. They were absolute slaves to the whispers of the imperial court, constantly changing their behavior to please people they secretly despised. Epictetus realized that although he wore physical chains on his legs, his mind was infinitely more free than the minds of his wealthy masters because he did not care about the applause of the mob. We do the exact same thing in our modern society today. Modern life constantly demands your immediate reaction. Notifications demand your attention. The opinions of your neighbors demand your response. The chaotic events on the daily news demand your emotional outrage. Slowly, you hand over your control without even noticing it. You do not do it dramatically, but quietly, habit by habit. You eagerly buy a $50,000 luxury car just to impress the people who live on your street. You wear uncomfortable and ridiculous clothing because a magazine told you it was fashionable. You sit at a neighborhood dinner party and quietly nod along to opinions you completely disagree with, absolutely terrified of speaking your true mind because you desperately want to be invited back next weekend. We contort our unique personalities to avoid the slightest bit of criticism, effectively handing over the keys to our happiness to a crowd of strangers who do not actually care about us. The philosopher Epictetus explicitly warned his students that if you ever turn your attention to external things so as to wish to please anyone, you can be absolutely assured that you have completely ruined your scheme of life. You are living as a psychological prisoner, constantly seeking permission from the world just to be yourself. The practical Stoic advice here is to wake up and recognize the invisible bars of this prison. You must deeply realize that people do not control you directly. They merely trigger reactions. And once your automatic reaction starts, the control immediately shifts from you to them. Anger, defensiveness, and over-explanation all give away your supreme authority. Awareness creates distance, and distance creates choice. By simply recognizing how often you adjust your behavior to seek external validation, you take the very first step toward dismantling the prison and reclaiming the absolute ownership of your own mind. Once you recognize the invisible prison you have built for yourself, the very next step is to understand the fundamental architecture of human power, which the Stoics called the dichotomy of control. The philosopher Epictetus laid down the ultimate law of human psychology when he stated that some things are in our control and others are not, and that in our power are thought, impulse, and will, while things not in our power include reputation and the opinions of others. To truly grasp the profound weight of this concept, we must look at the ancient Stoic metaphor of the archer. Imagine a highly skilled archer preparing to shoot an arrow at a distant target. He has complete control over how much he has trained his muscles, the specific type of wooden bow he selects, how he completely focuses his breathing, and the exact moment he decides to release the bowstring. But the very millisecond that arrow leaves his fingers, his control drops to absolute zero. A sudden gust of wind blowing at 40 miles per hour could push the arrow completely off course, or the target itself could suddenly move. The ancient Stoics understood that human interaction is exactly like that flying arrow. You have absolute control over your own character, your honesty, and the quality of your personal work. But the very second you release your actions into the public sphere, how other people judge them is entirely out of your hands. They view your actions through the highly distorted lens of their own insecurities, their own hidden biases, and their own temporary moods. Consider how this illusion of control plays out in your modern daily life. You might spend 3 entire weeks working 80 hours a week on a massive presentation for your corporate office, checking every single detail and doing absolutely everything right. You deliver the presentation flawlessly on a Tuesday morning, but your regional manager just had a terrible commute in heavy traffic. Or perhaps he is secretly deeply jealous of your rising talent, so he completely dismisses your hard work and criticizes you in front of the entire boardroom. If your entire sense of self-worth is desperately attached to the external outcome, which is the applause and approval of that manager, you will be absolutely crushed by severe anxiety and ultimate disappointment. You will feel like a complete failure because you missed the target. But if you deeply internalize your goal, focusing entirely on the fact that you drew the bow beautifully and did the absolute best work possible, you remain entirely untouchable by his unfair criticism. You simply accept the result, whatever it may be, and move forward with your peace of mind completely intact. The brutal reality is that people will judge you based on their own highly flawed perceptions, and you can never force them to understand your true intentions. The philosopher Seneca warned that if you attach your happiness to the opinions of the crowd, you will be constantly shifting your behavior, oscillating between letting things go and frantically pursuing their favor. The practical Stoic advice here is to radically shift your baseline definition of success. You must stop trying to manipulate the wind after the arrow has already flown. Stop demanding that your co-workers admire you, that your neighbors envy your suburban lifestyle, or that your family members constantly validate your life choices. Your only duty in this world is to draw the bow with absolute integrity, honesty, and moral virtue. by completely abandoning the desperate and exhausting need to control what happens inside the minds of other people. You instantly win back the ultimate freedom to finally be respected by yourself, entirely immune to the unpredictable shifting winds of public opinion. This profound realization about the dichotomy of control naturally leads us to the third lesson, which requires us to actively train against our own feelings of embarrassment. The ancient historian Plutarch wrote that the great Stoic philosopher and Roman statesman Cato the Younger deliberately accustomed himself to be ashamed only of what was really shameful, and to completely ignore the low opinion of men regarding all other things. To truly understand this, we must look at how Cato actually lived his daily life in the heart of ancient Rome. During a time when the Roman elite were obsessed with status symbols, wearing expensive, brightly colored purple robes, and being carried through the streets by retinues of slaves, Cato chose a completely different path. Despite coming from a highly wealthy and influential family, Cato deliberately wore plain, dark clothing that was entirely out of fashion. He frequently walked through the crowded city streets completely barefoot and bareheaded, whether it was raining or under the intense heat of the summer sun. He did not do this because he lacked the money to buy shoes or a horse. He did it as a highly calculated psychological exercise. Cato knew that the citizens of Rome were pointing at him, laughing, and whispering about his eccentric behavior behind his back. But that was exactly the point. He was intentionally exposing himself to the ridicule of the crowd so that he could build up powerful immunity to their judgment by voluntarily experiencing their mockery over superficial things like clothing. He trained his mind to realize that their opinions could not actually harm him. He forged an impenetrable armor against the fear of what other people thought, ensuring that he would never compromise his deeply held moral values simply to fit in with the corrupt politicians of his day. In our modern society, we suffer from the exact opposite mindset. We are completely terrified of standing out or looking foolish. Imagine driving a 15-year-old car with peeling paint and a dented bumper into the parking lot of a highly exclusive country club, or walking into a high-end suburban grocery store wearing stained sweatpants and a torn shirt. Your immediate physical reaction is a burning sensation of severe shame in your chest. You keep your head down, avoiding eye contact, absolutely terrified that the people around you are judging your financial status and your personal worth. You mistakenly believe that their silent judgment is somehow damaging your actual character. But if you look at this situation through the objective lens of Cato the Younger, you must ask yourself what exactly you have done wrong. You have not stolen absolutely anything. You have not lied to anyone. You have not acted with cruelty or malice. You are simply violating a superficial social convention, yet you are torturing yourself with severe anxiety. The practical Stoic advice here is to implement the Cato exercise in your own daily routine. You must actively and deliberately practice voluntary discomfort to cure your intense fear of the crowd. You do not need to walk barefoot through the streets of New York City, but you can deliberately wear an unfashionable outfit to the local coffee shop on a Sunday morning. You can ask a seemingly obvious question during a corporate board meeting, completely risking the illusion that you know absolutely everything. You can leave your smartphone at home and sit alone on a park bench without pretending to be busy when strangers walk by. When you deliberately step outside of your comfort zone and intentionally invite mild social disapproval, you are performing cognitive exposure therapy on yourself. You watch the strange looks from the cashier. You feel the brief moment of awkwardness, and then you calmly observe that you are still perfectly safe. You realize that the sky has not fallen, and that your moral character remains entirely intact. By doing this repeatedly, you break the invisible chains of psychological slavery. You learn to be ashamed only of actual moral failures, and you completely liberate yourself from the exhausting prison of public opinion. Once you have successfully practiced stepping outside of your comfort zone and actively inviting mild social disapproval, you will inevitably discover the fourth and perhaps the most liberating lesson of Stoic philosophy. The audience you are so desperately performing for is entirely an illusion. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius was arguably the most famous, powerful, and heavily scrutinized human being on the face of the earth during his lifetime. Millions of citizens watched his every single move, critically judged his political decisions, and gossiped about his personal life within the imperial court. Yet, in his private journals, Marcus frequently reminded himself to completely ignore this massive, invisible crowd. He wrote a profound question to himself, asking how much time and leisure a man gains when he is not curious to know what his neighbor has said, or has done, or has attempted, but focuses only on what he does himself, so that his own actions may be just and holy. Marcus deeply understood a fundamental psychological truth that we constantly ignore in our modern era. We walk around every single day suffering from a massive, self-inflicted spotlight effect. We falsely believe that a bright, highly focused spotlight is shining directly on us at all times, and that everyone around us is keeping a detailed, permanent record of our mistakes, our awkward moments, and our physical flaws. Imagine you are walking into a crowded neighborhood gym for the very first time. You feel incredibly self-conscious because you are out of shape and you are only lifting 10-pound weights. You look around the room and you are absolutely certain that the highly athletic people are secretly mocking your lack of progress. You feel a heavy, burning anxiety in your chest, and you want to leave the building immediately. Or imagine you accidentally spill your cup of coffee all over your white shirt during a morning presentation at the corporate office. You spend the next 3 weeks agonizing over the embarrassment, completely convinced that your coworkers are constantly laughing about your clumsiness behind your back. But the brutal and incredibly freeing reality is that absolutely no one is thinking about you. The athletic person at the gym is entirely consumed by their own physical insecurities, their own training goals, and their own fear of failure. Your coworkers completely forgot about your spilled coffee 10 seconds after it happened because they are entirely terrified about their own upcoming performance reviews, their own mortgage payments, and their own domestic troubles. Every single person on this planet is playing the lead role in their own mental movie, completely obsessed with their own daily script, which means you are nothing more than a fleeting, temporary background extra in their lives. The ancient Stoics found massive psychological comfort in this objective reality. Marcus Aurelius frequently meditated on the sheer vastness of the universe and the incredibly short lifespan of human memory to completely neutralize his anxiety about public opinion. He bluntly reminded himself that the people whose approval we so desperately seek are fundamentally flawed, endlessly distracted, and entirely mortal. Why should you hand over your supreme peace of mind to a group of strangers who do not even have their own chaotic lives figured out? The highly practical Stoic exercise for this crucial stage of your journey is to actively dismantle the illusion of the audience. The very next time you feel a sudden wave of social embarrassment or a desperate urge to curate your image to impress someone else, you must stop and forcefully remind yourself that people are far too busy worrying about their own reflections to actually care about your perceived flaws. By fully accepting the objective truth that no one is actually watching you with the intense scrutiny you imagine, you instantly drop the exhausting weight of your daily theatrical performance. You stop wasting your precious mental energy trying to manipulate an audience that simply does not exist. And you finally unlock the absolute freedom to build a life based entirely on your own moral virtues, your own personal goals, and your own unbreakable standards of excellence. Once you fully grasp that the massive audience you have been performing for is entirely a psychological illusion, you might ask a very valid and difficult question: what happens when someone actually does attack you directly? What happens when the harsh criticism is not just imagined in your head, but is very real, highly intentional, and pointed straight at your face? This brings us to the crucial midpoint of our Stoic journey, the ultimate shift in how you process human interaction and protect your peace of mind. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius provided the perfect psychological defense when he wrote to himself, "To choose not to be harmed, and you will not feel harmed. And if you do not feel harmed, then you absolutely have not been." To deeply understand this profound level of emotional immunity, we must explore the ancient Stoic concept of the inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius ruled the entire Roman Empire, commanding legions of soldiers and dealing with constant political betrayals, vicious rumors, and endless public scrutiny. Despite being the most visible and heavily judged man on the planet, he maintained absolute tranquility by constructing an impenetrable fortress entirely inside his own mind. The Stoics believed that your mind is a heavily fortified castle. The walls are incredibly thick, and the gates are made of solid iron. External events, the shifting opinions of your neighbors, the rude comments of your co-workers, and the malicious gossip of your former friends are completely outside of these massive walls. They are essentially standing in the muddy moat, shouting angrily up at the stone bricks. The brutal truth of the universe is that their insulting words are absolutely nothing more than invisible sound waves vibrating through the air, or meaningless digital pixels glowing on a smartphone screen. They have absolutely zero physical mass. They cannot actually break down your stone walls, and they cannot forcibly enter your mind to cause you emotional pain. There is only one possible way for an insult or a harsh judgment to actually hurt you. You must willingly walk over to the gate, unlock the heavy iron bars, lower the wooden drawbridge, and personally invite the insult inside your own mind. When you get angry, heavily defensive, or severely depressed because of what someone said about you, you are voluntarily betraying your own fortress from the inside out. Imagine you are attending a large family gathering for the Thanksgiving holiday, and a highly critical relative deliberately insults your career choices in front of the entire dining table, telling you that you are wasting your potential and making a terrible financial mistake. Your heart rate instantly spikes, your face turns bright red, and your immediate physical reaction is to fight back angrily or to completely shut down in severe shame. You feel deeply and personally wounded. But the Stoic perspective reveals that your relative did not actually wound you. They merely fired a flimsy arrow of judgment at your thick outer wall. You were deeply wounded because you actively chose to pick up that arrow and stab yourself with it. You foolishly believed that their highly flawed opinion somehow dictated your actual human worth. The highly practical advice for this critical stage of your journey is to actively lock the heavy gates of your inner citadel. The very next time someone insults you, mocks your clothing, or heavily criticizes your personal lifestyle choices, you must insert a massive, deliberate pause between their stimulus and your reaction. Do not immediately lower the drawbridge. Stand firmly at the top of your mental watchtower and look down at their words as if they are entirely separate from you. Recognize that their harsh judgment is fundamentally a tragic reflection of their own hidden insecurities, their own profound ignorance, and their own miserable internal state, not a factual report about your character. By completely refusing to give your absolute consent to their insults, you render their attacks entirely powerless, ensuring that absolutely no one can ever enter your mind without your direct permission. Once you have firmly locked the heavy iron gates of your inner citadel, you must learn the exact tactical mechanism for dealing with the enemies who are standing right outside your walls screaming at you. This brings us to the sixth profound lesson of Stoicism, which provides the ultimate psychological shield against verbal attacks and unfair criticism. The Stoic teacher Epictetus offered a brilliant and highly practical method when he issued a strange challenge to his students. He told them to go stand next to a large, inanimate stone and brutally slander it with the worst insults imaginable. He then asked them what actual effect they would possibly produce. The stone, obviously, would not react at all. Epictetus then concluded that if a human being listens to harsh insults exactly like a stone, the slanderer has absolutely no advantage and zero power over him. To truly understand the supreme power of this absolute indifference, we can look at a famous historical account involving the Roman statesman Cato. While visiting the crowded public baths, Cato was suddenly struck by an aggressive stranger. When the angry man eventually realized he had just struck one of the most powerful and highly respected politicians in Rome, he was completely terrified and immediately rushed over to beg for forgiveness. But Cato did not punish the man, and he did not even offer a gracious pardon. Instead, Cato simply looked at him and calmly stated that he did not remember being struck. Cato showed an infinitely finer spirit by completely refusing to acknowledge the blow than he ever would have by getting angry. The Stoics deeply understood the fundamental logic of human conflict. An insult is essentially a psychological transaction. It absolutely requires a desperate sender and a willing receiver. The person insulting you is actively trying to hand you a heavy, toxic package of shame, anger, or insecurity. But if you completely refuse to reach out your hands and accept the delivery, the sender is left standing there awkwardly, forced to hold their own toxic package. By refusing to respond to an insult, you are paradoxically utilizing the most effective and powerful response possible. Your complete silence is incredibly disconcerting to the insulter. You are entirely robbing them of the twisted pleasure of having successfully upset you, which almost always leaves them deeply frustrated, confused, and powerless. Consider how this plays out in your modern daily life. Imagine you are sitting in a highly important afternoon meeting at your corporate office, and a jealous co-worker deliberately makes a condescending remark about a major project you just spent 3 months working on. They are desperately hoping to trigger an emotional, defensive outburst from you in front of the regional manager. Your immediate biological instinct is to fiercely defend your hard work and hurl a sharp counter-insult right back across the large mahogany conference table. But if you apply the Stoic technique of the stone, you do the exact opposite. You simply look directly at them with a completely blank, relaxed expression. You let 4 entire seconds of heavy, deeply uncomfortable silence fill the room. You do not blink, you do not frown, you do not cross your arms, and you do not offer a single word of defense. Then, you calmly turn your attention back to your printed notes as if the co-worker never even opened their mouth. The practical Stoic advice for this stage of your journey is to actively train yourself in the supreme art of the non-response. The very next time someone hurls a petty insult at you, mocks your personal lifestyle choices, or leaves a highly toxic comment on your social media profile, you must completely refuse to engage in the emotional transaction. Do not try to justify your actions. Do not argue with their flawed logic, and absolutely do not attempt to construct a clever comeback just to save your pride. Become the solid stone. Let their harsh words bounce completely harmlessly off your impenetrable surface. By granting your critics absolutely zero reaction, you instantly suffocate their hostile intentions and you maintain the supreme, unbroken tranquility of your own mind. Once you have mastered the art of becoming an impenetrable stone in the face of harsh insults, you must immediately confront the 7th and perhaps the most deceptive lesson of the Stoic philosophy, which is the incredibly dangerous trap of human praise. We naturally assume that while criticism is terrible, praise is entirely good. But the ancient Stoics understood that these two things are exactly the same weapon, just held by different ends. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius laid down the absolute truth about external validation when he wrote in his private journal that whatever is beautiful by itself, and it is entirely finished by its own nature, meaning that praise is absolutely no part of it, and a thing is neither made better nor worse by being praised. To understand this profound psychological concept, we can look at the historical account of a highly respected Roman statesman named Pausanias Agrippinus. During a time when Roman politicians were desperately hiring crowds of people to loudly applaud them in the public squares, and commission massive marble statues of themselves to inflate their own egos. Agrippinus chose a completely different path. The Stoic teacher Epictetus noted that Agrippinus was a man of the absolute highest moral worth. Yet he never praised himself, and he would actually blush with genuine discomfort whenever anyone else attempted to shower him with public compliments. Agrippinus deeply understood the fundamental psychological trap. The very second you allow another person to inflate your ego with their applause, you have voluntarily handed them the exact same needle they will eventually use to completely deflate you. If you require their praise to feel incredibly good about yourself, you will inevitably require their silence to feel absolutely terrible about yourself. Consider how this dangerous dynamic plays out in our modern society. Imagine you are working at a large corporate office and you successfully close a massive financial deal that brings in $2 million for the company. During the Friday afternoon staff meeting, the regional manager stands up and publicly praises your absolute brilliance, calling you the most valuable employee in the entire building. Your heart rate increases, your chest swells with intense pride, and you spend the entire weekend floating on a massive cloud of external validation. You have effectively handed the keys to your happiness directly to your manager. But the following Tuesday, you make a minor administrative error on a different account, and that exact same manager sends you a sharply worded email criticizing your lack of focus because you allowed his previous praise to lift you up to the ceiling. His current criticism violently slams you directly onto the concrete floor. You are completely crushed, entirely exhausted, and suffering from severe anxiety. The Stoics recognize that human praise is nothing more than vibrating sound waves in the air, heavily influenced by the temporary moods and hidden agendas of the people delivering it. An emerald does not suddenly lose its extreme value simply because no one is standing around cheering for it. And a piece of ordinary plastic does not turn into a diamond just because 50 people are clapping for it. The highly practical Stoic advice for this stage of your journey is to radically sever the emotional chain of praise and criticism. The very next time someone showers you with a massive compliment about your physical appearance, your new suburban home, or your recent career promotion, you must remain completely internally indifferent. You can politely say thank you, but you must absolutely refuse to let their external opinion penetrate the walls of your inner citadel and inflate your ego. By actively rejecting the intoxicating high of public praise, you permanently vaccinate yourself against the devastating low of public criticism, securing a stable and unbreakable peace of mind that no one can ever manipulate. Once you have permanently vaccinated yourself against the deceptive trap of public praise, you are finally ready to confront the eighth and perhaps the most humbling truth of Stoic philosophy, which completely destroys the human obsession with reputation and legacy. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled the entire known world and possessed absolute political power, constantly reminded himself of the sheer emptiness of fame when he wrote in his private journal that everything fades so quickly, turns into legend, and soon absolute oblivion covers it completely. To fully understand the profound vanity of caring about what other people think, we must look at the ancient Stoic observation regarding one of the most famous conquerors in human history, Alexander the Great. Alexander marched his massive armies across thousands of miles of earth, conquered countless foreign nations, and built entire cities that bore his name, desperately trying to secure an immortal reputation that would last forever. But the Stoics bluntly pointed out a very harsh and equalizing reality when Alexander the Great finally died. He was buried in the exact same cold dirt as his lowly mule driver. All of his incredible wealth, his terrifying military power, and the massive crowds of people chanting his name could not prevent him from turning into the exact same pile of dust as the poorest servant in his empire. Furthermore, every single person who actually remembered Alexander, every person who praised him, and every person who hated him also died shortly after and turned into dust. In our modern society, we suffer from a massive delusion regarding our own legacy. We exhaust ourselves completely trying to build a perfect reputation. Imagine a highly successful corporate executive who sacrifices his physical health, ignores his family, and works 90 hours a week for 40 years, just so he can have his name engraved on a brass plaque in the main lobby of a massive corporate headquarters in downtown Chicago. He desperately wants to be remembered and admired by the future generations of employees. But the brutal and undeniable reality is that in 100 years, that massive corporate building will likely be completely demolished. The company will be entirely forgotten, and the strangers walking down the street will not know or care absolutely anything about who he was or what he achieved. The Stoics understood that caring about your posthumous reputation is the ultimate exercise in human foolishness, because you are essentially performing for an audience that is also standing on a trap door that will inevitably open. The highly practical Stoic exercise for this stage of your journey is the ancient practice of memento mori, which translates to remember that you must die. The very next time you find yourself deeply worried about how a particular decision might negatively affect your long-term reputation, or when you feel terrified that your social circle will judge your personal choices, you must immediately zoom your perspective out to the absolute vastness of time and space. Recognize that the planet Earth is nothing more than a tiny dot in an infinite universe, and that your human life is merely a brief spark in the endless timeline of eternity. Why should you sacrifice your current peace of mind and your true moral character just to secure a few fleeting words of approval from people who are just as mortal and temporary as you are? By actively meditating on the absolute certainty of your own death and the inevitable erasure of your human legacy, you instantly destroy the heavy chains of social anxiety. You stop living your precious and limited life for the imaginary applause of the future, and you finally begin to live fully and virtuously for yourself in the only moment you actually possess, which is right here and right now. When you finally accept the absolute certainty of your own mortality and recognize the profound emptiness of human legacy, you arrive at the 9th and final stage of this Stoic journey, which is the attainment of ultimate and unbreakable freedom. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius beautifully captured the essence of this liberation when he wrote in his private journal that whatever anyone does or says, he is bound to the good. much like an emerald might constantly proclaim that whatever anyone does or says, it must always remain an emerald and keep its true colors. An emerald does not desperately need the loud applause of a massive crowd to be brilliantly green, and it certainly does not turn into a worthless piece of gray gravel just because a stranger walks by and loudly insults it. It simply exists, completely complete and entirely perfect within its own inherent nature. For your entire life, you have likely been living your days like a frightened chameleon, constantly changing your colors, your personal opinions, and your entire personality to perfectly match the specific social environment you happen to be standing in at any given moment. You have been quietly asking the outside world for permission to simply be yourself. You walk into a crowded room and subconsciously ask the people there how you should behave, what jokes you are legally allowed to tell, and what political or social opinions are safe to share. You hand over the supreme authority of your own identity to a group of highly flawed, endlessly distracted, and equally insecure human beings. But the ancient Stoic philosophers deeply understood that true freedom is absolutely never granted by society. It is something you must actively and courageously declare for yourself by completely withdrawing your desperate need for external validation. The philosopher Epictetus taught his students that the unrestricted person, who has in hand what they will in all events, is truly free. But anyone who can be restricted, coerced, or pushed into something against what they will is nothing more than a slave. You must deeply realize that every single time you bite your tongue to avoid mild social disapproval, or every single time you buy an expensive luxury item just to impress a distant coworker, you are voluntarily walking right back into the exact same invisible prison we discussed at the very beginning of our philosophical journey. You are securely locking the heavy iron door from the inside and happily handing the key over to complete strangers. To achieve the ultimate freedom the Stoics spoke of, you must radically shift your entire center of gravity from the chaotic outside world back to your own impenetrable inner citadel. Imagine how incredibly light and joyful your daily life would feel if you woke up tomorrow morning and completely stopped performing for an imaginary audience. Imagine walking into your corporate office building or attending a crowded neighborhood dinner party and feeling absolutely zero psychological pressure to prove your financial worth, defend your personal lifestyle choices, or carefully curate a flawless public image. You simply show up exactly as you actually are, holding firmly to your own moral virtues, your unshakable honesty, and your own personal integrity. If people admire you for your authenticity, that is perfectly fine. If they deeply misunderstand you, actively mock you, or completely ignore you, that is perfectly fine too, because their reaction is entirely outside of your control and fundamentally none of your business. Your only duty on this earth is to be the emerald. The practical application of this final Stoic truth is to forever stop apologizing for your rightful existence. You must immediately stop negotiating your own self-worth with the unpredictable outside world. When you finally sever the heavy, exhausting chains of public opinion, you do not become cold, bitter, or painfully antisocial. Instead, you become profoundly peaceful. You become completely untouchable by the shifting winds of human judgment. You suddenly realize that you do not need the universe to neatly cooperate with your daily plans, and you absolutely do not need the crowd to applaud your efforts. By completely surrendering the exhausting and mathematically impossible illusion that you need to manage what everybody else thinks about you, you win back absolutely all of your precious mental energy, and you finally step into the ultimate, untouchable freedom of simply being yourself. We have reached the end of this journey into the profound and liberating philosophy of Stoicism. You now understand that the invisible prison of public opinion is built entirely by your own hands, and because you built it, you possess the absolute power to tear it down. You have learned the dichotomy of control, the liberating truth that the audience you perform for is a psychological illusion, and the harsh reality that both praise and criticism are nothing more than meaningless echoes in the vast expanse of time. As the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius powerfully reminded himself, the mind freed from passions is an impenetrable fortress, and a person has no more secure place of refuge for all time. You must stop handing over the keys to your inner citadel to co-workers, strangers, and neighbors who are desperately fighting their own silent battles. Your time on this earth is incredibly brief, and every single second you spend worrying about the flawed judgments of others is a second permanently stolen from your own pursuit of virtue, excellence, and true happiness. The choice is now entirely yours. You can either continue to live as a fearful chameleon, constantly changing your colors to beg for the approval of the crowd, or you can choose to be the emerald, holding firmly to your own true colors regardless of what anyone else says or does. If you are finally ready to break the chains of external validation and claim your absolute psychological freedom, I want you to leave a comment below saying, "I am the emerald." If this message changed your perspective today, make sure to hit the like button so this philosophy can reach more people who are trapped in the exact same invisible prison. Finally, to continue building an unbreakable mind and mastering the ancient art of living, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our future lessons. Stay strong, protect your inner citadel, and I will see you in the next video.